YouTube, get some people joining.
If one of my colleagues wants to come and answer any questions, is there a place to do that?
Yeah, they can join either here or on the YouTube and answer those chats. So I can share this with
Okay. Oh no, it looks like Dietrich actually got it for him, so we're good.
Cool. And we are live.
Chats,
Welcome,
so
everyone.
I can share this.
Thanks a lot.
Oh no, it looks like Dietrich actually got it for him, so we're good.
A little echo. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us. Hope everyone's doing well at the midway point of the Chainlink Hackathon. Really excited to have Andrew Hill, the co-founder and CEO of Textile, joining us today. Textile is a developer tool development company that's working with IPFS, Filecoin. Andrew could probably explain that a little more than me, but really excited for everything that they're working on. And Andrew, I'll let you take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining me this morning or this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. So yeah, like you said, we at Textile, we build tooling around the IPFS and Filecoin ecosystem to try to give developers different ways to access those protocols and build them into their applications. I've heard that the number of teams building on IPFS is really high, which is awesome and exciting that so many people are using that. And I know firsthand how valuable that is in building decentralized projects. So that's exciting. Today, I'm going to show you a bit more of our work that has focused on exposing Filecoin APIs in new and possibly interesting ways for your project. Though I think we will touch a little bit on IPFS because a lot of the work that we do tries to bridge those two protocols in ways that allow you to sort of more seamlessly transition data to Filecoin, bring it back to IPFS, store the metadata for all that all together. So I'm going to jump into some slides here. The way today's talk is going to go is kind of just some overview of what's happening with Filecoin, specifically from the client side, not really talking too much about miners or miner mechanics or economics or anything like that, but really thinking about like how people are getting data into the network, just to stir up some ideas of your own. And then I'm going to jump into one of our technologies, which is probably one of the softest landings for developers to add data to the Filecoin network. And I'll walk through kind of hands-on there for you to explore. And then finally, I'll talk about a couple other more advanced technologies that you could tap into, a couple of them that are really sort of like low-hanging fruit for the hackathon, I think. So let me just share my screen. I'll share these comments real quick. Maybe let me share my slide links with my colleague so he can spread them out. Okay, so let me now jump into this. Okay, so the slides that I have here are all just web-based slides, and so hopefully my colleague Carson can share that on a couple of the different places where you're connecting, and you can follow along because there's a lot of links in here that you can dig into and be finding resources. But the first thing is if you do want to follow along the hands-on, just go to textile.io, grab an account, and then the first thing it's going to do is give you instructions on how to install the command line tool for our system. And if you install that now, kind of alongside of this presentation, you'll be ready to go to follow along kind of the 5 easy steps to get your data from your hard drive onto the Filecoin network. Yeah, okay, so the first slide I have is actually that. So just encouraging you to go grab this. So if you grab the slide links and want to follow along, this has sort of the quick link to get the account and to grab the CLI download. And if you're here, I assume most of you are here because you are actually taking part in the hackathon. If any of you showed up here just because you're interested to hear the workshop, but aren't taking part in the hackathon, I highly recommend it. You can just go to chainlink, chain.link/hackathon and register. I don't think it's too late, though it's getting near midterm here, so you should be putting things together, putting ideas together pretty quickly here. But lots of exciting things happening and lots of really cool cool rewards for teams that build stuff. So do that if you're not already doing that. And actually really interesting and pertinent is a blog post from, I believe it was just yesterday, on the Filecoin blog. So if you go to filecoin.io/blog, there's some talk about how they're working to bring these two chains closer, which is super exciting, and getting sort of the full loop of data flowing through Chainlink onto Filecoin and confirm deals back onto Chainlink, which is super exciting. Read that; it'll probably get your brains firing too. But still, lots of really cool things to build and lots of cool things to do. So a bit of an overview on the ecosystem of tools to add your data to Filecoin. So like I said, not really going to dive into what miners are doing, how that side of the network is assembling. It is super exciting. There's 3.5 exabytes of data committed to Filecoin, lots of it ready to be used to store your data. Miners are there. It's a really cool marketplace. So how do you get your data into it? So the first sort of client to share with you is sort of the OG of Filecoin network clients, which is called Lotus. Lotus is essentially as close to the network as you can get. When you run Lotus, you'll be able to sync the full chain. You'll be able to make API calls that will directly talk with other actors on the chain. You're going to be a full participant essentially in the Filecoin blockchain. And so if that's the route you want to go, you can find that on the Filecoin project GitHub repo with instructions on how to install it. And if you go to the Filecoin docs as well, it'll point you this direction. Lots of really cool things to learn here. But one thing is that this API is really low level. It's kind of all the primitives of the network are exposed as an API, and you can use them in the CLI here, and no real opinions about how to put these things together. So it's the Wild West on what you want to do on top of it, but a really great thing to actually work through if you want to know the low level of Filecoin. But that gets me to the next client, which is one that we've actually built, and I think could be really useful for folks that want to build things quickly on Filecoin, and it's a project called Powergate. You can find it on our docs. If you just go to docs.textile.io, on the left-hand side, there's a section about Powergate. And Powergate is really handy because it has a bunch of opinions about how to use the Lotus node. So if you run Powergate, you'll actually be running Lotus, connecting to the full chain again, but it has sort of a bunch of APIs and utilities that run on top of that to take those low-level commands and wrap them up into what we think are really useful building blocks that help you create storage deal pipelines, help you monitor deals on the network, help you move data from IPFS to Filecoin and back and forth, and lots of other neat things, like a miner index, for example, for finding high-quality miners on the network that match some parameters of how you want to store data, how you connect with them, get the data on them, all that good stuff. And we think it's pretty easy to use. It's all Dockerized. You can make Powergate, make mainnet, maybe I forget the mainnet launch command, because I always use this technology called localnet, which I think I'll come back to later in the talk. But it's worth noting that the section of the Powergate docs called localnet is really useful for teams, especially teams at hackathons where you want to start building quickly. Localnet lets you spin up Powergate and Lotus locally, and it will actually build a little mock Filecoin network for you. It's actually a fully featured Filecoin network. It spins up a miner on this local network, and but that miner has sort of the complicated algorithm of Filecoin stubbed out and mocked so that it can run really fast. And what that allows you to do is build on the full API of Powergate on a really quick network locally. And so you can use every API of Filecoin, but your deals will seal. You can start doing retrievals. Everything is very easy for you to test. And so we use this in CI, for example, quite a lot. We built this to do with Powergate first because we needed it, but there's also a version of that you can run with just the pure Lotus node. So we maintain a Lotus DevNet project that basically you can run Lotus on just that mocked miner and use the full Lotus API as well. So if you want that low level stuff, you can skip the Powergate and also run that mocked network and use the full API. And that's in these docs as well. So take a look there if that's sort of the area that you're going and you want to use Lotus, you want to use Powergate, and you want to move quickly at first as you're just testing and experimenting. That's a really handy tool. But then, yeah, you can run Powergate on mainnet. You can host that anywhere. Powergate has a bunch of wallet management tools and multi-tenancy and all that stuff so that you can build platforms or integrate it with systems with different needs and things like that. It's really a versatile tool. Yeah, and actually, like that distinction between Powergate and Lotus, if it's not clear, I have a link here, when to use Powergate, and it just has a list of kind of the 10, I don't remember, but a bunch of different sections of kind of where Powergate is making some decisions and wrapping things up to make them easier to use or replicable, where Lotus does not do that, just having those low-level APIs. And so if you want to get your head around that, that's a really handy link. So that's kind of the low-level APIs. Now moving on to the interfaces that are available to get data into the Filecoin network. And there's a few different ones that all kind of have a different flow, so depending on what you need. One is Fleek. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people who have experimented with Fleek. Fleek allows you to take data that's that you're putting on IPFS already and expose it over in a few different ways, but the kind of original primary way is put a website around it. So have your data serve a website and do that DNS management and all that good stuff, and with certificate management and everything. And so very handy tools for if you want to get your data integrated into other systems. Fleek does some really cool stuff there. But then behind the scenes, what Fleek has started to do is take all those projects that people are adding to Fleek and package them up and store them on Filecoin. So just by using Fleek, that data will get onto Filecoin behind the scenes automatically. Another one that I'm really excited about for a number of reasons is called Voodfi. And I think one of the biggest reasons I'm excited about it is just the domain. I think there's a few different projects working on video, and I'll show you another one in a second here. And video is just such an obvious early use case for Filecoin, really large data sets, lots of storage demand, and lots of projects in the decentralized space trying to figure that out. And so Voodfi is just one small market. They're really targeting education, this group of education material creators. But their beta right now is open to anyone. And so you can go to beta.voodfi and create an account, upload files, and it will store it on IPFS and Filecoin simultaneously. And and you'll get your embed, your embed for your website and all the normal video things. And it's a really cool project, so worth checking out. But I think there's so much more experimentation to still do on video and Filecoin, and I find it really exciting. Another great one is file.video, which is a collaboration between LivePeer and Filecoin. And if you're not familiar with LivePeer, another really interesting blockchain, essentially transcoding videos over a decentralized network. Yeah, and really cool project. This lets you sort of get a taste of that. Like go to this website, upload a file, get your data out on those networks. But also there's a blog post recently on the Filecoin blog about a further partnership between Filecoin and LivePeer to incentivize miners. And I think this is really interesting to get miners to run LivePeer nodes and Filecoin nodes directly side by side, so that you can get your data resampling or whatever you need from LivePeer really close to the data where it's being stored. And there's some obvious Chainlink opportunity there to make that even more tightly bound and consistent, and that's really cool. And I think we'll see a lot of this like co-location of miners, which is a really neat direction. Another interface, so like Lotus is the OG of the API client sort of stack. Slate is sort of the OG of the interfaces stack. Really beautiful interface for you to go and experiment with collecting data and collaborating around that data. So this is really meant to be kind of collaborative curation of data online, and it uses IPFS under the hood. And they also have tools for getting that data stored on Filecoin with wallet management and miner selection and everything there. Really cool project, definitely worth checking out. Another kind of new entry to the interface / API space. Well, okay, so this is more API, but basically trying to enable more interfaces and specifically NFTs is Nft Storage. And so Nft Storage does a couple of neat things. One on IPFS, I'm sure a lot of you that are building on IPFS have been hitting APIs. And there's been a movement just in the last like 6 months or so to standardize those APIs with the pinning API spec, which is really cool because then projects can sort of seamlessly transition across pinning providers. And so Nft Storage offers a pinning offers the pinning API using that spec, and but then data that's being pushed to Nft Storage will also be stored on Filecoin. And I think maybe one of the most important parts of this project is they're working to kind of figure out what are going to be the conventions and standards around how Filecoin data is reported on all of these chains, which is really important work. And we'll be learning a bunch from that and trying to incorporate in things that we're building as well. Another one that maybe won't be immediately useful to people at this hackathon, but depending on where you go or other projects that you're taking part in, maybe is really interesting. And so it's a project called Swann. So Swann basically has a task queue, and you can sign up and add your data to the task queue, and miners can come and claim that data, which is really interesting and kind of a different take on getting data onto the Filecoin network. And then Powergate again. So on the API level, Powergate offers a really comprehensive API for building on top of all the things you can do with Filecoin on Powergate, and that includes moving data between Filecoin and IPFS. And so this API is like fully featured. So you can use the admin APIs, you can use the token to scope it to single users of the system where they each have their own set of wallets and their own balances, and they're siloed from all the other users. They have their own data storage queues. And this JavaScript client will do it all. So this JavaScript client probably isn't well suited to embed in a browser. There's no ACL here. There is some token-based ACL, but we're not really testing those at the browser. There's no like bearer auth kind of thing where you're going to cycle tokens or anything like that. This is all backshop stuff. But what you can do is actually like layer on top of this some nice simple ACL that then exposes it to users and ensures that only those users are accessing the APIs. But there's a lot you can do here, and there's a lot of documentation and examples for building this into, say, Node applications. And you can find that. There's links to it in our main docs, but here's the link to it directly, and you can play with it. Lots of cool stuff you can do there. And also really cool, all the examples, you'll see the inline examples if you go to this link in the main page here, just below where it is, will be examples showing you how to just use it on that local net. So you can run the full kind of mocked Filecoin network right on your computer, use this JavaScript client, connect to it, test that all the connections are working right, immediately like get the yes/no validation, see what kind of metadata comes out of the system, build everything, and then as a final step, launch your connection to mainnet and have real Filecoin balances moving around. So hopefully that helps people sort of explore faster and build faster. Okay, then the next one I wanted to talk about is textile buckets. So we're going to kind of drill into this. Textile buckets is an API for you to push data from local, whether local is your local disk or a browser session, push data to remote IPFS peers. But it does it as sort of UnixFS directories. And so that sync step to push the data to remote peers is meant for you to create these collections of data very much like an S3 bucket, where you can modify and update those buckets. You can sync those buckets between peers, and you can snapshot those buckets to Filecoin and get the metadata back about how that data is stored on Filecoin. And we offer a remote peer for the bucket network on a platform we call the hub. So you can take your local bucket, push it to the hub, and then call a command called archive, which will snapshot that bucket, add it to a queue to be added to Filecoin, and then that's how you get your data back. And that's all like just a handful of commands. So we'll walk through that. But really, this is just like the tip of the iceberg on the number of clients that are being built right now and the number of clients that are still to be built. And there's so much experimentation that needs to happen. These are just a selection of some of my favorites and ones that we've worked with, so I'm most familiar with them. But there's just so much more to do and so many exciting things to build, especially linking in things that you can do with Chainlink and connecting other blockchains, creating oracles, creating interfaces on top of those oracles, like just some really cool stuff to still be built. But check out all of these for inspiration or to play around with it or see how they're thinking about using the Filecoin network. They should be insightful. So buckets. This is where I want to drill in to start. I'm going to try to give an overview, kind of a more technical overview of buckets. Then we'll do the hands-on with buckets. So if you haven't already, go get ready with the CLI. And then I want to talk about Powergate and a final resource, which I think is really low-hanging fruit for chain-safe building, which is what we call the miner index, which is a feed of really useful data about miners that are storing data on the Filecoin network. But so let's start with buckets. So like I mentioned, buckets, you can kind of think of them like S3 buckets, but over IPFS. So they provide object storage and synchronization, and so you can create folders, synchronize them over IPFS, and actually provide some simple access control to those folders so that other people can edit them with you and change them with you. One of the things that we've tried with buckets is they're really an experiment on how to think about this shared syncable data over IPFS. So IPFS is always dealing with this concept of pins, but buckets kind of lets you collect a bunch of pins, and it has a folder structure that it really tries to deal with. So you collect a bunch of pins in single folders, but then your sharing and permissions can happen within just that folder, which is really handy. So I could be syncing my pin set, which is just one bucket, to one peer with one other user, things like that. But we try to bridge a lot of different protocols per bucket so that you have different ways you can use it. So obviously every bucket is using IPFS, and every time you change that bucket, the root CID of the bucket will change because of the nature of IPFS. But every bucket also gets an IPNS address. So every bucket has a unique key that you'll be using, or you can use, and that key is actually an IPNS address. And so you can take that IPNS address and use it to pull your bucket from any other IPFS node to get the latest state. And you can also use that on any IPFS gateway that supports IPNS endpoints and look at the state of your bucket. So you can do things like serving web content or sharing data sets from buckets over IPNS addresses. Anytime you change your bucket, that IPNS address will stay the same, but the data will change. And HTTP, so we actually do automated DNS entries in one of our sites so that your bucket will get a static website there. And that again, we'll just use the IPNS key, but it gives you kind of a nice website where you can go look at it. So if it has an index.html file in the root, it will render it for you every time. And then finally, Filecoin. And so you can snapshot your buckets to Filecoin and get your data on the network. And then from there, you can be building on it. So we have the CLI, which we're going to play with today. There's also, again, fully featured JavaScript client library where you can be doing this stuff from Node. There's permissions and access control that you can get. You can get API keys, so you can embed it in websites as well. So you could be doing this from the browser to push data to remote IPFS nodes, and even calling the snapshot commands to get that data on Filecoin. It was originally written in Go. So if you want to run sort of the full bucket node, you can run it locally. There's a repo called Go Buckets. You can play with that as a library, break buckets, build on them. But there's also a Go-based Go-based client here, so you can build on just buckets using the client as well. Yeah, so I mentioned here in the last point about pinning services, the way that buckets work is you can create buckets locally and then push them to our remote services, which act more or less like pinning services because they'll pin that bucket for you. And if you change the bucket, it will just change what it's pinning. We're also working right now on implementing that pinning API spec that I mentioned per bucket, which is I think really interesting and kind of exciting because the way buckets scope and collect pin sets, you'll be able to basically have a pinning API for a pin set that you can be syncing to different peers in different ways, but also sharing and giving permissions to just sets of collaborators. So you can have collaborative pin sets, each with their own pinning API that you can be plugging into other systems, which is really cool. And that's coming in. There's actually an open PR in the Go Buckets repo where that's a work in progress, but lots of work has been done already, and pretty excited to see that. Okay, so let's jump into some hands-on. If you feel like following along, awesome. If you just want to see how this happens, it will be entertaining still. So like go to textile.io and grab the CLI. Just do the quick sign up, grab the CLI, or you can go to our docs and follow the CLI download instructions. They're in there too. And then let's make our first Filecoin deal. To do that, I'm going to jump out of my slides and over to my CLI. So I already have the CLI installed. It's just installed as a hub. And don't worry, that's actually invalidated. Not a problem. So yeah, I think the first thing with any command line utility is to just call the help command, and you can kind of get a view of what's happening here. Buckets, there's just this shorthand called buck for when we're doing stuff with buckets. When you first install the CLI, if you haven't created an account already, you can actually just create that through here. And what that account creation will do is allow you to use that remote node to push your buckets and get them persisted. So you just need to call this, it will have you verify your email, and you're done. And then your session will actually be always set up. If you've already got an account, you can call login instead, and that will set up your session. Today, we're going to be focused on just the buckets piece of this. One thing that I do recommend is to use the orgs, though. When you create an account on Textile, it will be just your personal account, which you can't invite other people to administer. But you can create orgs and then do your work as an org instead. And orgs let you have multiple admins on the account. There's kind of two concepts of accounts here. There's kind of the developer account, which is what you've got. You can invite other developers to all collaborate on an org. But when you're building an app, you can also create API keys, which will let you create users that themselves can use some of the storage on remote services and things very easily without having to do all this. And again, scoping them to orgs is really handy because you can have multiple admins that can all be building the same app. So let's actually just start there. I'll show you that really quick. You can do hub orgs create, and I'll just create a fake one here. If I create hub demo 99, great, I have an org. Just creating the org, I'm not using it yet. So the first thing maybe I want to do is I want to invite somebody. So I'll just invite my collaborator. And I can just, and I'll just invite Carson. And okay, so now he'd be invited, and if he started using this org, everything he does and everything I do we're just adminning this together. Now, if I want to make commands as the org instead of my personal account, I can use if I wanted to just look at all my API keys, for example, I could list them, or this would be my personal account with my API keys, or I could list all the API keys of this new organization that I just created, which doesn't have any. I'm gonna, the other way I can do this is actually I can export, I can do an environmental variable, which will just pick that up every time. So if I do that now and just call this, it will be as demo 99. So I recommend creating an org and then setting it up this way. I'm going to actually use another org here. Okay, so, and then actually the presentation that I'm sharing right now is in a bucket that I pushed this morning. And so if I go ahead and try to push this again, there are updates there. Okay, don't want to push those. But if I just did, let me just make a new if I just go into a new folder, I can actually create a new bucket pretty quickly. So to create a new bucket, you're going to just do hubbuck init. And then I would choose a name. One thing before I do this, just remember if you didn't do an organization, or sorry, if you did do an organization but you didn't export it as a environmental variable, you can just again add it as a flag here to initialize the bucket within your org instead of your personal account. But I exported that environmental flag, so all this will be part of my org now. So if I initialize this, I'll pick a name for it. I don't want to encrypt it. And then you don't have to actually know quite the details here, but behind the scenes, there's this decentralized database tool called Threads, where the metadata for buckets are actually being synced around. And so I can just go ahead and put this in a thread, a throwaway thread. So now I have this bucket initialized, and you see I get all those links for the IPNS address, for the DNS domain. So if I want to go ahead and make this usable, maybe I want to push some data to the remote IPFS peer. So to do that, maybe I'll just make a file. All right, so now to make that data pin to the remote node, I just need to push it. And finally, if I want to get all those links again, I just call the hubbuck links. Don't worry, you're not supposed to be following along this part. This is just a little tour. And I can go and see this data now over any gateway. So here's the gateway for our IPFS node. And you can see here's the index file. It doesn't render it here by default because this gateway is to explore the contents of that bucket. But if I go to another gateway endpoint that will render that, you'll see there it is. And because it's IPNS, I can go to any IPNS gateway, enabled gateway, and pull that data, which is cool. So, and I could update this and get it updated out there in the world. But now let's jump into the Filecoin sides of this. So Filecoin right now really biases towards larger data sets. Right now there's just too much cost for miners to pick up really small files and get them recorded on chain. So miners are much more eager to take larger data sets. This data set, I actually changed it just earlier. It's not 5 gigabytes anymore, it's 250 megabytes. But just a warning, if you run this command, you will download 250 megabytes. So I'm going to create a new bucket. So when I ran before this command, I was initializing a bucket with no data in it. But you also have the ability to initialize a bucket from an existing CID on the IPFS network. If you're not familiar with IPFS, it uses a concept called content-based addressing. And the way it does that is that every piece of content gets a unique ID that is the hash of the data that is behind it. So when I created that index.html on IPFS, that actually gets hashed, and the address to that from any other IPFS peer is the hash of the file itself. I'm not going to get into that today, but proto.school is a great URL to go to, and one of their one of their sections on CIDs goes into this very, very nicely. And so if you're curious more on how this is happening or what a CID is, go check that out. But this CID is an address on IPFS to a folder that contains some videos of the Apollo mission. And so if I initialize a bucket now from that CID, it will actually pull that data from the IPFS network and use that as the starting place for my bucket. Okay, so yeah, like I said, that's just downloading 240 megabytes to my local drive and creating that bucket from that. So what's really cool here is now I'll have this data set that I can start moving to Filecoin. How do I move it to Filecoin? Well, on that remote peer on buckets, every account, so here the organization that I'm using has its own wallet address on Filecoin. So if you do not Buck here, but if I do Phil, I can check the address of my wallet. So if you signed up for an account and you're using the command line now, you can actually do the same thing, and you can go and get your address on the Filecoin network. You can see I've already got a balance here. The balance is important because you're going to need it to make deals on the network unless you don't need it, which is like something to keep in mind here. And what I mean by that is right now, this address is not a verified address on the Filecoin network. And so miners actually are incentivized at a greater rate on the Filecoin network if they make deals with verified clients. Okay, a verified client, again, not going to get super into it today, but if you want to learn more, just go ahead and call that address command, and there's a little helpful piece of information here to get your address verified. And if you go to that URL, you can kind of go and learn more and then go through the steps of getting verified. A couple notes here. One, if you go and learn more about verification and then go to get verified, there's two paths. There's an automatic verification and there's a general verification. Automatic verification will get you 8 gigabytes of verified storage. General verification lets you apply for way more than that. And so if you think your application over the next year is going to need 10 terabytes, you can just go here and actually start an application process, get that 10 terabyte cap for your project assigned to your address, and then go start making deals. Why is this important? Because if you want to store 10 terabytes of data on the network right now, you might be able to do it for free or nearly free if you get verified first. So definitely check that out if you have plans. But that's a bit about the addresses. The next thing is that, okay, so now I have this bucket. I've created the bucket. I've pulled the data from the CID of what already existed. We can see that over the internet by just going to the IPNS address anywhere we want. You can see, okay, here's the video that's in my bucket. And if you've done the same commands, you'll have a bucket with that same video. Nice. So the next thing we want to do is we want to store that on Filecoin. Now, storing data on Filecoin is kind of especially if you're using like Lotus or use Powergate, there's a few different steps here that we pack all into really simple commands if you want. And I'm going to dig into one of the options here in just a second, but I want to show you how to do this the simple way first. And so the simple way first is just to call this hubbuck archive. Now, hubbuck archive, again, help is always a handy friend here. But the thing is that the way that storage works on the hub and in Powergate, because the hub is actually just exposing Powergate for you, is every storage deal that you want to make has a configuration that says how many miners you want to store it with. Do you prefer some miners or miners locations over others? What's the maximum you want to spend? So if you just do hubbuck archive default config, it will spit that out for you. That's what your default config is. You can override this by running hubbuck archive set default config. In set default config, you can either feed it a new JSON file with all this filled out, or you can override flags by sending it a bunch of commands. So here I'm setting a bunch of commands here. I'm saying I want to enable fast retrieval. So this is just asking the miner, hey, store this data and make a copy of it available on the network so I can get it back really quick if I want it. And a bunch of miners are willing to do that. If they're not willing to do that, they won't pick up your deal. I'm setting a trusted miners list, and here I'm just selecting one miner. And then I'm choosing a rep factor of 1, which is just saying store this bucket on Filecoin with one miner only. And so if I go ahead and run that, nothing's happened except for it's updated my default storage. So now if I print that out again, you can see it's added my trusted miner, it's enabled fast retrieval, those things. So so there we go. My default config is set. And the last thing I need to do is tell it, go ahead and snapshot this to Filecoin. And then I'm going to come back actually and show you some really cool things about selecting miners, because you don't have to do this. You could let it just go and find a random miner. But there's another API that we have that is a really helpful API for selecting a great miner and picking the best miner the first time every time. And so I'll show you that in a second. And that API, whether you're using buckets or Powergate or neither, that API itself has some data that's really cool that I think you could build into your projects if you're going to tackle Filecoin. But okay, so I've set my default config just as you see it here. Now all I need to do is run this last command, which is to run hubbuck archive. And hubbuck archive, it just does that last step. It will go and execute all the information in my storage config to move the data from IPFS to a stored deal on Filecoin. And yeah, it's just telling me that that's what I'm going to do and making sure that I really want to do it. It's also going to give me a couple more warnings about that not being a verified address, which just means it's going to probably charge me real Filecoin to do this. I'm okay with that for this demo. And there we go. And now Filecoin storage takes time. Like the miner needs to go pull the data. They need to run sort of the early steps to do the proving algorithms. And so before it gets verified on chain. And so because that process takes a while, this now becomes async, and we can wait. But you can do other things here. So if you go back to the help commands, you can call the watch command. And so if you do the same thing here, we can just kind of watch the status of that deal unfolding. And you can see where it is along the way. So it's proposed the deal to the miner, and now it's just waiting for them to do those steps of getting it on chain. And I can come back here and check in on the status of it over time. And again, all those things are in the CLI, but they're also in all of our APIs. So you can build those building admin tools for you and your team, or you can use the API keys, embed it in an application, and build these features for your users to let them get data on the Filecoin network. We also have tools so that you can create, Filecoin addresses for all your users and stuff like that. So hopefully that's helpful. And that's it for buckets. Just wanted to give you the easy 5 steps to get your first data on Filecoin if you're trying to figure it out and want to do that without having to sync all of the chain or anything. But then you can go do Lotus or Powergate to get the full chain experience. So now I want to dig into both Powergate and this trusted miners piece. So let me start with Powergate because I think I already covered most of the important pieces here. But just so that you have some resources, and there's a couple links and helping you get grounded if you decide to go the Powergate direction. So I already mentioned it's like a production-ready Filecoin development stack. Everything that I showed you just now using buckets, actually behind the scenes, is built on Powergate. So that's how it manages moving this data, finding miners, all that stuff. And it also has this scalable deal pipeline, so you can queue up a lot of deals and wait for them all to complete, and it will handle ushering them through. And actually, like I could set here back, if I go back to the way that I set my storage config, I had set my rep factor to 1. Something that I often do is like set my rep factor to 3 and pick like 6 possible miners so that Powergate can go out and try to just pick the quickest 3 essentially to fulfill my deal and stuff like that. So all of that's possible. And then it also will do pinning on IPFS for you. So if you run a Powergate, there's a IPFS node inside of there. And so you can actually set with this storage config, you can set whether you want it also pinned in IPFS and that sort of stuff. So lots of really handy things. Already mentioned the capabilities of LocalNet. Go check out these docs for running LocalNet on your own machine and just, spinning up the full Filecoin API to use pretty quickly. And then running on production. So yeah, it's ready to go. Make up, that was the command I can remember. Make up will just run Powergate and run it on mainnet, which means it will like spin up your Lotus node, start syncing it to the network, all that good stuff. Lots in there, definitely worth going and playing around with. I can just show you that possibly really quick. So in the Powergate repo, if you go ahead and clone it, you can just go cd into the Docker folder, and this is where you just run make localnet, and it has all the instructions for running Powergate, running the Lotus node, running that little mocked miner network, running an IPFS node, all that, exposing the ports on your local machine so you can connect to the APIs, everything there. And so I'm just going to wait a minute here for it to update all the images, and then Powergate would be blasting. Same thing for makeup, though it might take a while to sync to the chain if that's what you do. So, and probably something that you really want to do if you're going to be running it in a production system. Okay, the next thing, why did you cut off? There we go. The next thing I wanted to show you, and the last thing I wanted to show you, is the miner index, which I keep mentioning is like just a really possibly powerful source of data for you to use for your hacks. And I have a whole nother presentation on that, and that's linked here that I put together when we released this earlier this month. But basically the miner index, it's an open API, so you can hit it. You don't need to be one of our users or anything like that. You can just build on it. It has an open API spec, or what was once called Swagger spec. So you can go to the URL and check out the docs on that, and even try it out and enter your own parameters there. It has 3 primary endpoints. It has the query endpoint, which will give you back a list of all the miners on the network that you can sort and filter and find the right miner for you. Once you have a miner, you can go to another API endpoint to get their profile, which is a bit more than you'll see in the query output. It will tell you some recent deal history that we have with them. And so we're doing more than just collecting what is on chain. We actually also collect telemetry data about our own deal pipelines going to these miners. And so we're collecting things like connection speed and download speed and all that. And we make that available here. Some of that's available in the main query columns, and some of it, if you just go to the miner profile, essentially API, you can pull that data. And this is all stuff we're collecting all the time and updating the index, so it changes. And then the last one is calculate. And so calculate's really cool. You can just tell it, here's a miner or a list of miners. Here's some parameters of the data I want to store. Here's the size. Here's the duration, and what is it going to cost me with these miners. And so that's really handy if you want to do the pre-calculation, obviously, of what it's going to cost on the network. And it's all over. It's all like if you just hit the API, it's just a JSON API. But it's also a command line tool. So I'm going to actually just show it to you live here. We built this into the Hub CLI. You can just use it though. You don't have to use any of the other things. So if I just do hub fill index query, it's just the basic. Let me just make this a bit smaller. Hope you can see it over the live stream. It's just a basic set of fields. And the default, being these 10 recent miners. And This default field, this default sort is really good if you just want to go grab a miner that recently has had some good quality deals. But you can do all sorts of sorting and filtering based on location, the pricing that they're quoting. And so here, for example, this is how much I would have paid for this miner. This is how much I would have paid for that bucket that I just archived, for example, if I had selected them. But if I had been a verified address, it would have cost me nothing. So that's a great example of that. But this looks underwhelming. And so there's another command that's going to just blow up my terminal here with too much. And this is actually also still just a kind of snapshot of the available columns, but yeah, but it gives you kind of a better look at some of the things that are available in here that you can start sorting and playing around with. Again, this is like, there's a lot more here. I think last count I saw was there's like 2,500 miners in here. But then obviously the JSON, like you can get that in your CLI too. So you can build this into tools you're building and just pipe JSON out of here, or you can use the API online. But you can see that there's just a ton of data in here that you can now use. So let's see what else to show you in here. I think the other one I can show you just real quick is the get. So this is to get a single miner, and you can see some of that telemetry data now coming back from them about this miner. And again, all these endpoints are available over JSON or over the REST API. So you can pull the same data from the API and build it in your app. But lots of really valuable information here that would be very cool to report on different blockchains for doing things like miner selection, miner ranking. Those kinds of concepts are really easy with this. The only real ranking we do is just that default sort order, which is we default sort it by recently successful deals, so that you know these are highly active miners right now. So there's a high chance that they'll pick up your deals really quickly. And that's a really good one to go with if you want high deal success rates. So yeah, I think that's about it. Let me just jump back in here and make sure. Yeah, that's it. So definitely check out the miner index, like really easy landing spot if you just want to play with some data and check that out. But also highly recommend trying out Powergate's local net if you want to spin up the Filecoin APIs kind of quickly locally, start building. Or if you just want to get data onto the network, go check out buckets and just do those steps to push data to the network. If you need any help with any of this stuff, we're always available on our Slack channel, just slack.text.io. We're also in the Filecoin Slack. There's a couple channels for buckets and Powergate that you can find if you just search either of those terms. But we're always around to give a hand and answer questions, and hopefully that was helpful to a team or two.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate you coming on. That was really helpful. And yeah, it's amazing everything, one, that you're working on a Textile, and then really talking about everything that's within the Filecoin and IPFS ecosystem. It's crazy what you guys are working on, and really exciting. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, and everyone who's listening in, if you have questions, definitely hop into our Discord. I dropped the slides that Andrew is using in there. So if you want to go through those, try it again yourself, definitely hop on there, take a look at the slides. And otherwise, Andrew, thanks again for joining. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody at Chainlink. Really awesome event. Yeah, and we got a couple questions rolling in. One, so was Textile birthed from Filecoin, or like what started it? Yeah, no, Textile came from, the origin of Textile is actually trying to figure out how we make a better future for data on the internet. And we had kind of this vision of things that we wanted to work on. And then we discovered IPFS and Protocol Labs. And we were like, wow, these are huge. These lower a lot of a lot of the hurdles to get to a better future. And started kind of looking at it saying, like, what does it take to build things on here today? And what sort of tools would developers need to adopt these things faster? And just said, like, okay, let's build some of those things, and started building buckets and started building threads. And then about a year ago, as the sort of imminent launch of Filecoin mainnet was coming and the tooling there was getting better and better and the experience was becoming obvious,
we started building Powergate as sort of the first stab to kind of connect these things together. And now we have some really cool projects in the work to do even more connections and make even more sort of like capabilities of moving data around the internet in new ways. And so we're really excited to just keep working with IPFS and Filecoin and Protocol Labs and like other really awesome projects in the space, like Ceramic. If none of you are, or if any of you are following that, if you're not, you should check it out. They're doing some really cool things about identity and data ownership, and Fleek as well. Really excited about that. So we're just trying to glue all these things together and give some neat ways for people to build stuff.
Love it, man. Yeah, really exciting, and it's cool to hear the story. And really appreciate you joining and taking the time to be with us today.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.